During World War II, Eastern European families built garden beds that fertilized themselves for 2 decades without any inputs, any labor, or any maintenance. They planted once, harvested abundantly for 20 years, and never added compost, manure, or chemicals. The beds actually became more fertile over time instead of depleting. By 1944, over 60% of rural gardens in Germany, Austria, and Poland were using this method. Food production per square foot tripled compared to conventional gardens. Labor requirements dropped by 70%. And families who built these beds survived food shortages that killed their neighbors. But after the war ended, the method disappeared. Agricultural colleges stopped teaching it. Gardening books removed all references, and within 15 years, everyone forgot that gardens could fertilize themselves permanently. Why? Because self-fertilizing gardens don't buy products. They don't need seasonal inputs. They threaten every company that profits from your dependence. Today, you'll learn what they buried and why. Number 1. The Hugelkultur Foundation. The method wasn't invented during World War II, it was rediscovered. For centuries, Eastern European farmers had practiced hugelkultur, German Vorhilkultur, building garden beds on top of buried wood. But modern agriculture had largely abandoned the practice by 1900, replacing it with chemical fertilizers and intensive tillage. War forced rediscovery when fertilizers became unavailable and food production became survival necessity. The principle was elegantly simple. Instead of removing dead trees, fallen branches, and woody debris from land, farmers buried it and planted on top. The wood became slow-release fertilizer that fed plants for decades. As buried wood decomposed, it released nutrients gradually, created air pockets, improving soil structure, and developed massive populations of beneficial fungi and bacteria. The process started with excavating trenches or simply mounding material on the surface. Logs and branches, the larger and older the better, formed the foundation layer. The wood could be any species, though hardwoods like oak and maple lasted longer than softwoods like pine. Partially rotted wood worked even better than fresh because decomposition was already initiated. On top of wood, layers of smaller organic materials were added. Leaves, grass clippings, straw, kitchen scraps, anything compostable. Then soil was mounded over everything, creating raised beds typically 3 to 4 feet wide and 1 to 2 feet tall. Seeds or transplants were planted immediately into the top soil layer. The buried wood acted as massive sponge, absorbing water during rain and releasing it slowly during drought. Plants growing on hugelkultur beds required 50 to 70% less irrigation than flat gardens. The decomposing wood generated modest heat, extending growing seasons by 2 to 3 weeks at both ends. And the nutrient release continued for 15 to 25 years, depending on wood size and species. Number 2. The World War II Desperation Build. Food shortages during World War II made hugelkultur transition from traditional farming technique to survival necessity. In German and Austrian villages, as fertilizer supplies were diverted entirely to military purposes and farm labor was conscripted, families returned to methods their great-grandparents had used. The results documented by agricultural advisors were extraordinary. One extensively documented case from a village near Vienna showed dramatic differences. To families living side by side with identical soil and similar garden space took different approaches. The first family maintained traditional flat gardens, trying to source scarce fertilizer and struggling with depleted soil. The second family built hugelkultur beds, using wood from bombed buildings and cleared forests. The results after one growing season were measured. The traditional garden produced approximately 40 pounds of vegetables per 100 square feet with intensive labor and whatever fertilizer could be obtained. The hugelkultur garden produced 93 pounds per 100 square feet with minimal maintenance and zero fertilizer. The difference meant adequate food versus near starvation. By the second year, the contrast became more dramatic. The traditional garden's yield dropped to 32 pounds as soil continued depleting without adequate fertilizer. The hugelkultur garden increased to 107 pounds as the wood decomposition accelerated and soil biology matured. The trend continued through subsequent years. Labor requirements showed equally stark differences. Traditional gardens required weekly weeding, frequent watering, constant fertilizing, and intensive soil cultivation. Hugelkultur beds needed occasional weeding in the first year, then almost none as plant density increased. Watering was required only during severe drought. No fertilization was ever needed. No tilling was performed after initial construction. Villages that adopted hugelkultur widely survived the war years with adequate nutrition. Villages that maintained conventional gardens experienced significant malnutrition and starvation-related deaths. The method wasn't just more productive, it was the difference between life and death when all other food sources failed. Number 3. The decomposition timeline. Understanding hugelkultur requires knowing the decomposition timeline and how nutrient release changes over years. The process follows predictable stages, each providing different benefits. This knowledge allows strategic planning for maximum productivity across decades. Year 1 through 3 represents the establishment phase. Fresh wood decomposes slowly, releasing minimal nutrients. During this period, the primary benefit is water retention and soil structure improvement. Gardens show moderate productivity, typically 20 to 30% higher than conventional beds do, mainly to improved moisture availability and extended season from decomposition heat. Some growers apply compost or manure during this phase to boost initial nutrient availability. Years 4 through 8 mark the acceleration phase. Wood decomposition speeds dramatically as fungal networks fully establish. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria colonize the decomposing wood, converting atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available forms. Nutrient release increases substantially. Gardens enter peak productivity, often producing double or triple the yield of year 1 with no additional inputs. This is when hugelkultur demonstrates its full potential. Years 9 through 15 represent the sustaining phase. Wood breaks down into rich, humus-like material. The bed height decreases gradually as material compacts and decomposes, but fertility remains extremely high. Nutrient release continues steadily. Plant growth is vigorous, and pest problems minimal due to excellent soil health. Many growers report this as the easiest period, requiring almost no maintenance while producing abundantly. Years 16 through 25 mark the declining phase. Though productivity remains significantly higher than conventional beds, the original wood has mostly decomposed, though large logs still provide structure and nutrients. Some growers refresh beds during this period by adding new wood layers, restarting the cycle. Others simply continue planting, accepting gradually declining yields that still exceed what conventional methods ever achieved. The timeline varies by wood species and size. Large oak logs can continue providing benefits for 30 to 40 years. Small branches and soft woods like pine may complete decomposition in 10 to 12 years. Number 4. The microbial ecosystem development. The real power of hugelkultur isn't the wood itself. It's the microbial ecosystem that develops in and around the decomposing material. This biological community creates a self-sustaining fertility system that chemical fertilizers can never replicate. Understanding this ecosystem explains why hugelkultur gardens improve. Over time, while conventional gardens deplete, decomposing wood provides habitat for fungal networks, particularly mycorrhizal fungi that form symbiotic relationships with plant roots. These fungi extend root systems by hundreds of times, accessing water and nutrients from far beyond where roots alone could reach. In exchange, plants provide fungi with sugars from photosynthesis. This partnership dramatically improves plant health and productivity. The fungi create microscopic channels through wood structure, allowing water and air penetration deep into the bed. These channels become highways for beneficial bacteria that process nutrients, fix nitrogen, and suppress disease organisms. The bacterial populations in mature hugelkultur beds measure 10 to 100 times higher than conventional soil, creating intense biological activity that cycles nutrients rapidly. As wood decomposes, it releases sugars and organic acids that feed bacterial populations. These bacteria produce plant growth hormones, vitamin-like compounds, and substances that stimulate root development. Plants growing in mature hugelkultur beds develop root systems 30 to 50% larger than identical plants in conventional soil, allowing them to access more resources and resist stress better. The ecosystem also provides natural pest suppression. Beneficial nematodes, predatory insects, and parasitic fungi that control pest species thrive in the diverse habitat hugelkultur creates. Gardens that have operated for 5 or more years typically show dramatically lower pest pressure than conventional gardens. The biological diversity creates checks and balances that prevent any pest population from exploding. This ecosystem takes years to fully develop, which is why hugelkultur improves over time. Chemical fertilizers bypass and damage these biological processes, providing temporary nutrients but destroying the foundation of long-term fertility. Hugelkultur builds permanent biological infrastructure that sustains productivity indefinitely. Number 5. The post-war suppression. Hugelkultur knowledge disappeared after World War II through the same systematic suppression that buried other biological agricultural methods. The campaign was subtle but comprehensive, erasing the technique from mainstream agriculture within 15 years despite its proven wartime success. As chemical fertilizer production ramped up for civilian markets, agricultural education shifted dramatically. Universities that had documented hugelkultur's success during the war received generous grants from chemical companies, but only for research supporting synthetic inputs. Professors who continued teaching biological methods found their courses eliminated and their positions terminated. New graduates entered agriculture with comprehensive chemical training, but zero exposure to biological techniques. Extension services followed identical patterns. Government agricultural advisors who had promoted hugelkultur during resource scarcity received new directives emphasizing modern scientific farming, which meant chemical inputs and mechanization. Pamphlets and guides featuring hugelkultur were pulled from circulation. New materials portrayed traditional methods as outdated and inefficient compared to chemical approaches. Gardening media completed the suppression. Magazines and books depended on advertising revenue from fertilizer, pesticide, and equipment manufacturers. Content promoting self-sufficient techniques that required no purchases meant alienating advertisers. Editors learned quickly that featuring hugelkultur resulted in advertising cancellations. Content shifted to feature methods requiring maximum product purchases. The campaign included subtle messaging that hugelkultur was messy, unattractive, and suitable only for rough rural areas, not proper gardens. Aesthetic standards were promoted that emphasized neat, flat, heavily managed beds. Hugelkultur's wild appearance was portrayed as unacceptable in civilized gardens. This psychological manipulation proved remarkably effective at making people reject a technique based not on performance but on appearances. By 1965, hugelkultur had been successfully marginalized. The few practitioners were dismissed as eccentric hobbyists rather than users of legitimate agricultural technology. Knowledge that had saved lives during World War II had been erased because it threatened fertilizer sales. The economic motivation was transparent, but the campaign succeeded completely. Number 6. Building your hugelkultur bed today. Constructing a hugelkultur bed requires no special tools or skills, just understanding of basic principles and access to wood that most people throw away or burn. The investment is several hours of labor. The return is 20 years of fertility without any additional inputs. Start by selecting a location with full sun exposure, minimum 6 hours daily. Mark a bed outline approximately 3 to 4 feet wide and any desired length. Width is critical because you need to reach the center from either side without stepping on the bed. Length is flexible. Many builders create beds 8 to 12 feet long. If building in lawn or weedy area, remove vegetation first. Then lay the largest logs available directly on the ground, running lengthwise down the dead center. Logs should be 8 to 12 inches in diameter ideally, but any size works. Place them tightly together without gaps. The more wood volume, the longer the bed maintains fertility. Fill gaps between logs with smaller branches, sticks, and woody debris. Pound them into spaces, creating a solid wood foundation approximately 18 to 24 inches tall. Then add a 6 to 8 inch layer of leaves, grass clippings, straw, or other fine organic material. This layer prevents soil from washing into wood gaps while providing immediate decomposition material. Top everything with 8 to 12 inches of soil. The soil can be existing garden soil, purchased topsoil, or mix of both, mounded into a rounded shape that sheds water to the sides. The bed will settle substantially in the first year as materials compress and begin decomposing. Plant immediately. No waiting required. The bed is ready for seeds or transplants as soon as construction finishes. First-year productivity will be moderate, but improvement occurs annually. Water regularly the first season until plants establish, then only during severe drought. They didn't survive with chemicals. They didn't depend on annual fertilizer purchases. And they didn't accept the lie that productive gardens required constant inputs and intensive labor. What they had was hugelkultur, a method so old it predated written records, a technique so effective it fertilized gardens for 20 years from one construction, and a technology so threatening to chemical profits that it had to be erased from agricultural knowledge. These weren't primitive mounds of trash. They were sophisticated biological systems that harnessed natural decomposition cycles. Ancient farmers understood that with decomposition released nutrients gradually while creating habitat for beneficial organisms. They built fertility systems that improved over time instead of depleting. We're taught to buy fertilizer every season and work harder annually as our soil dies. During World War II, when fertilizer disappeared and food meant survival, people remembered these methods. They buried wood and built gardens that fed families through years of shortage. They proved conclusively that biological systems outperformed chemical approaches when you measured total productivity over time instead of just first-year results. Then chemical companies needed post-war markets, and suddenly that knowledge became inconvenient. Today you're told that productive gardens require nitrogen fertilizer in spring, phosphorus at planting, potassium at fruiting, all purchased from companies that profit from your dependence. But hugelkultur gardens built in 1943 are still producing in some locations, 80 years later, without ever receiving any fertilizer. The productivity never stopped because it was never based on inputs. It was based on biological processes that sustain themselves perpetually. The truth they buried is simple. Gardens don't need chemical fertilizers. They need organic matter, decomposing continuously while hosting massive microbial populations. That organic matter comes from wood that most people throw away or burn as waste. Buried properly, that waste becomes 20 years of fertility. Ancient Europeans knew this. World War II survivors rediscovered it. Chemical companies erased it. And now you know why. If you believe knowledge should be accessible, if you want independence instead of dependence, if you understand that the best technologies are often the ones they stop teaching, then you're exactly where you need to be. Hugelkultur isn't historical curiosity. It's practical agriculture that works today exactly as it worked centuries ago. Subscribe now. Learn what they erased, and become part of the generation that refuses to pay for what waste would provide freely. Because when fertilizer prices spike and supply chains break, you'll either know how to build permanent fertility, or you'll learn what dependency really costs. The lazy garden that fertilizes itself for 20 years isn't lazy. It's genius, buried under decades of corporate profit-seeking.